Alright, good day students. So in this video we'll go ahead and add the transaction part for the withdrawal. So from last we left off, you should have just went ahead and created your balance and withdrawal as well. Okay. So from here on we'll go ahead and create the actual backbone into actually recording some of these transactions. So the first thing we want to go ahead and do is create a template that we are going to be following in order to actually see these transactions. In order to do that, we need to create a class. Let's close some. So I'm going to go to the top of my project, right click, add. Then I'm going to add a class. I'm going to call this transaction singular.cs. First thing I want to go ahead and do is change this from internal to public. That way I have full access throughout my code for it. Now I want to create some properties. So I'll do the shortcut props. The first one is going to be an ID. And I'll do prop again. Then I'll create a double. And this will be called previous balance. Like so. I'll create another double. I'll say amount. We'll create a fourth variable for the new balance. And then finally we'll create a timestamp. So we'll make it a date time. Stamp. And finally, I want to go ahead and create the constructor, so CTOR, so that way whenever a transaction gets generated, these need to automatically be added. So I'll do this dot d. Oh, of course. I apologize for that. We need to go ahead and generate our elements in here. So int ID double brief balance. Oops. Double amount. Double new balance. And then date times timestamp. Now we can do this previous balance period. One thing to note is you don't necessarily need to add the this keyword in here. I'm just doing this so it is easier for you guys to identify which ones are the class values and which ones are going to be received. So the ones on the right side are going to be received whenever we create an object of the type transaction, and then they're going to be applied to our properties in here. Okay, again, technically you could go ahead and omit the this dot part. I'm just leaving it in there so that way you can identify that these ones are indeed your class variables, all right? So at this point, we're done with the class declaration. Now we need to go ahead and implement. So I'll go ahead and do this inside of the withdrawal. So let's bring that in. So we have this scheme in here. So what I want to go ahead and do is actually have this, whenever we click one of these guys, generate something. And that is going to be sent over to the welcome main in here. So let's just double click in here. The first thing I want to go ahead and do in here in the welcome main is, first off, we need to declare our object. So I'll go all the way up where we have our public balance username. And I'll do public, and then list. And then in here, I want to create the list of the type transaction. transaction, and then I'm going to call this transactions. Equals new list transaction. Okay, so we'll have a public list of transactions made by individual transaction. Okay, so with that created, now we can actually start to think, where can we go ahead and use it? Well, technically we're going to be needing it in two places. The first one is going to be where we do our withdrawal, and the second one is where we do our deposits. Now, mind you, the implementation is fairly similar. So what I'll go ahead and do is I'll just put it right here below where we receive the balance. And technically, once we have the list of transactions, this balance that we are receiving can be omitted. This again was just to show you how we can send back information back and forth. All right, so in here, what I'll go ahead and do is I'll call the transactions dot add. And then here we want to go ahead and call who is going to be sending us the new transaction, which in this case is going to be the withdraw form. And we have yet to declare the method, but I'll do so right now. I'll call this add transaction. And the add transaction will basically just pass in an object of the type transaction. So it'll basically pass a singular object and we will add it to our list of transactions. All right. And again, this is just showing us an error because we have not yet declared this. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So I'll select it. We'll go over to the withdraw. Here, go to the bottom. And we'll say public. And this is going to be returning a transaction. So we need to declare a transaction and then we'll call it add transaction. Okay, since we are returning a transaction, it needs to be of the type transaction. So in here, I'll just do the return right now. And that way, I can start thinking. All right, so what is our transaction composed of? Well, it's composed of the ID, composed of the previous balance, and all these elements, right? So we need to think, well, do I have these elements? And honestly, right now, we don't have all these elements in here. Some of them we're going to calculate, some of them we need to generate. But in order to do any of that, first we need to create some public variables so we can work with them a lot easier. So first I'll create my public ID and I'll do public double previous balance. Next balance variable, but just keep it to the, I think first off we had amount. Then we do have next balance, new balance. Then finally we'll have our timestamp. And since I've made these capital, I'll make the rest of them capital. So that way they're all even, right? So we have our ID, our previous balance, our amount, new balance, and timestamp. Now we need to think, where are we going to be setting these, okay? And we have several places where we can go ahead and try and set these values. And a lot of these is depending on how you coded this part. In my case, I have the withdraw amount, which is where I go ahead and set. No. No. yeah, so it's inside my withdrawal amount. In here, I go ahead and set the value. And it isn't getting confused by myself. Then here, the withdrawal amount, I want to go ahead and just set this value in. And this is where I receive both the amount that the user wants to take away and I have access to the balance before it is affected by our transaction. So in here, I would want to go ahead and do the following. So this dot first previous balance, and we'll set that to balance. Then I want to do the amount. So this amount, not amount. Oh yeah, amount. There we go. Then I want to go ahead and set the timestamp. So we set timestamp equals datetime dot now. This basically just grabs both the date, hour, minutes, seconds down to like very absurd milliseconds and stuff. But yeah, for right now, that is completely fine. And then after we subtract the balance, we want to say this dot new balance equals to the balance. And that is where we're setting right now our variables. Now, the only thing that we are currently missing is the setting of the ID. And for that, there's several ways that you can go about it. You can go ahead and generate random values. You can just go ahead and do a grab the past ID, add one to it, and so on. Right now, just to simplify things, we'll do a random value, and we'll do that in here inside the transaction. So I'll say random, new random. Gotta love that autocomplete. And then here I'll say ID equals random dot next. There we go. And this is gonna generate just a random integer value, and we'll be able to grab that and just add it in. Okay. So from here, so in here you just want to pass in that new, excuse me, that new transaction. I'll just declare it top new. So I'll say var transaction equals new action. And then we just need to fill this in. So we'll pass in the ID, previous balance, amount, new balance, and the date. So timestamp. So, and then we can just return the transaction over. It is. So at this point in time, we don't have anywhere to reflect this transaction, but in theory, if we've done everything correctly, once we do a withdrawal, we shouldn't get an error, meaning that the object itself passed along correctly. And there we go. So the next point of this would be actually, having where we can go ahead and display this. So what I'll go ahead and do is right now, I'll just add a datetime, a data grid view in here so we can actually see the transactions. And that way, every time we do one, we'll see the updated values. So I'll come over data. In here, I'll ignore all of these. Band. And then I want to go ahead and rename this. So inside of the design, I'll change this from data grid view 1 to just transaction. transaction history. So that we don't necessarily need to double click it. Go back to code of the welcome main. And in here, I want to go ahead and just go ahead. Whenever we load in the code, I want to go ahead and set the transaction history dot data source. Not liking it. This hmm, data bind. Was I just mistyping? Must have been mistyping it. All right. So we just initialize it here. Obviously, our transactions don't have anything, but what this will do is just add, our fields, so our ID, stuff like that, so we can see those in there. Where we actually want to go ahead and set those or have them actually be displayed is, for example, in here under the withdraw. What I want to go ahead and do is say transaction history dot data source. And in this case, I want to set it back to null, but refreshes and then transaction history. Oh, then dot data source equals and then transactions. All right, so let's go ahead and run it. Nope. So as you can see, just by binding it at the moment that the page loads, we get our ID, balance, amount, balance, timestamp. So now if I go, for example, to the withdrawal, I see my values in here. I can go ahead and select one of these. So let's do 60. And something happened. Now, obviously, go as smoothly as I want. Oh, transaction history. Here we go. Transactions. Right. So with that fixed, go. So we get our random ID generated by our random value. We have the previous balance, which is $500. Well, $5,000. I'm sorry. The amount 600. I cannot. Numbers are hard today. So 60. And then the new balance. And then we have the time of the date. So 10 a.m. Correct. And we have the hour and all that. And whoop, dialogue. All right. Didn't like that I fix the design. But now we have a way of registering our transactions. Okay. You can see I got a new transaction there. Transaction there. If I were to do that amount. So at this point in time, our history transaction is working. So we have a way to record our transactions. Now, the one thing that you will notice is that at this point in time, we are not registering whether or not, well, obviously we can see that these are withdrawals, but it would be nice to actually see, type of transaction, right? Deposits or withdrawals. So I'll leave that up to you. So you need to go ahead and add a state or type of transaction field right next to the ID, and that can be either, type of transaction, and that should say either withdrawal or deposit. Okay, so that is going to be your assignment for this week. Let me know if you have any issues trying to solve it, and I'll see you guys hopefully by Friday.